My girlfriend texted from her luxury girls trip. We're extending the vacation, send more money. I didn't reply. Then I packed her bags, left them with her mother. I, 32M, stared at the text message on my phone, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misinterpreting anything. The blue light from the screen illuminated my face in the dim apartment, and I could feel my jaw tightening with each word I processed. She wanted more money. Not asked. Wanted. The message had this casual, almost entitled tone that made something shift inside my chest. We'd been together for 4 years. I worked in digital marketing, pulling long hours to build something stable, while she bounced between part-time gigs and what she called her creative pursuits. I never minded supporting her dreams. That's what partners do, right? But this trip had already cost me $3,000, money I'd pulled from my savings account without hesitation when she said her friends were planning something special and she didn't want to miss out. The trip was supposed to last 5 days. Today was day 7. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and walked to the window. Our apartment overlooked a parking lot. Nothing scenic, but I found myself staring at the empty spaces below, thinking about how I'd gotten here. The request for more money wasn't what bothered me most. It was the assumption that I'd just comply, that my role in this relationship was to be the ATM while she lived her best life somewhere tropical with umbrella drinks and infinity pools. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This time it was a photo. She was wearing a new dress I'd never seen before, something expensive looking with a designer label visible in the corner of the mirror selfie. The caption read that they'd found this amazing boutique and she just had to have something special for the yacht party tomorrow. Yacht party. I sat down heavily on the couch. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. I started thinking about the past few months with clearer eyes than I'd allowed myself before. The way she'd become increasingly distant. The way conversations about our future got deflected or dismissed. The way she'd started treating my contributions as obligations rather than gestures of love. I picked up my phone and opened our banking app. We had a joint account for shared expenses, something I'd suggested a year ago when we talked about moving toward a more serious commitment. My direct deposit went in there. Her sporadic income, when it came, went into her personal account. I scrolled through the recent transactions and felt my stomach drop. Charges I didn't recognize. Expensive restaurants. Shopping sprees. Cash withdrawals. All while I'd been eating meal-prepped chicken and rice to save money. All while I'd been taking extra freelance projects to build our future. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I felt calm in a way that scared me a little. I called my bank and asked about separating the joint account. The representative walked me through the process. It would take a few days, but I could restrict her access immediately if I suspected fraudulent activity. I didn't frame it that way. I just said I needed to make some changes. Next, I called her mother. We'd always had a decent relationship. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear a television playing in the background. She asked how I was doing, and I told her I was fine but needed to discuss something important. There was a pause. Then she asked if everything was okay with her daughter. I explained the situation carefully, without anger or accusation. I told her about the extended trip, the requests for more money, the pattern I'd started to notice. Her mother went quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. She said she'd been worried something like this might happen. She said her daughter had always had expensive tastes and a problem with responsibility. I asked if I could bring some things by her house. She understood immediately what I meant and agreed without hesitation. She even apologized to me, which made the whole thing feel more real somehow. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I started packing. I didn't do it out of rage. I did it methodically, carefully, like I was completing a project at work. I pulled her clothes from the closet, folded them neatly, and placed them in the suitcases she'd left behind when she took her designer luggage on the trip. I packed her toiletries, her books, her decorative pillows that I'd never understood but had made space for. I even wrapped her framed photos carefully in bubble wrap. The apartment transformed as I worked. Spaces appeared that I'd forgotten existed. The bathroom counter suddenly had room. The closet looked almost empty. With each item I packed, I felt lighter, like I was shedding weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. It took me 4 hours to pack everything. I loaded the bags into my car around midnight, made 3 trips up and down the stairs. Then I drove across town to her mother's house. The porch light was on when I arrived. Her mother opened the door before I could knock, and she helped me carry everything inside without saying much. She hugged me before I left, and told me I was doing the right thing. I drove home and sat in my empty apartment. Our apartment. No, my apartment now. I looked at my phone. No new messages. She probably assumed I was sleeping, or working late, or just waiting to obey her next command. I didn't reply to her text. I didn't send money. I just went to bed. The next morning, I woke up early and started making calls. First, I contacted our landlord and explained that I'd be the sole occupant moving forward and needed to update the lease. He was surprisingly accommodating, probably because I'd never missed a payment. Then I changed the locks. It cost me $200 to have a locksmith come out same day, but it felt necessary. I went to work and threw myself into a campaign analysis for a client. Focusing on ROAS metrics and impression share data felt comforting in its predictability. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't ask for money they hadn't earned. My colleague asked if I was okay because I'd apparently been staring at my screen without blinking for 20 minutes. I told him I was fine, just focused. My phone stayed silent until early afternoon. Then it started. The first call came while I was in a meeting. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then a text asking why I hadn't sent the money. Then another text, this one with more edge to it, asking if something was wrong with my phone or my bank account. I finished my meeting and looked at my phone. 17 missed calls. 23 text messages. The tone had progressed from confused to annoyed to angry. The final message told me I was being ridiculous and childish and she needed a response immediately. I typed out a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I sent something simple. I told her that her belongings were at her mother's house, and she should arrange to collect them when she returned. I told her I'd separated our finances and updated the apartment lease. I told her we were done. My phone immediately rang. I declined the call. It rang again. I declined again. Then the messages started flooding in, faster than I could read them. Accusations. Justifications. Promises to explain everything. Threats about what she'd tell our mutual friends. Pleading. More anger. A cycle that repeated in different words. I turned off my phone and went back to work. That evening, I stopped by a bar near my apartment. I'm not much of a drinker, but I felt like I needed to be around people, around noise and life. I sat at the bar and ordered a beer I didn't really want. The bartender was a guy about my age, and he had this knowing look when he saw my face. He asked if I was celebrating or forgetting. I told him maybe both. We talked for a while. I didn't go into details, but I told him the broad strokes. He nodded like he'd heard the story before. He said his brother had gone through something similar, girlfriend who saw him as a wallet instead of a person. He said his brother waited too long to end it, let it drag on until it destroyed his credit and his self-respect. He said I'd done the right thing cutting it off cleanly. I went home feeling slightly better. The apartment still felt empty, but it also felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in months. I could breathe. I ordered takeout and watched a movie I'd wanted to see, something she would have complained about or talked through. I stretched out on the couch and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just for myself. Over the next few days, the messages continued, but with decreasing frequency. She tried different approaches. Sometimes apologetic, sometimes angry, sometimes trying to make me jealous by mentioning guys she'd met on the trip. I didn't respond to any of them. I'd said what needed to be said, and everything else was just noise. Her friends started reaching out. A few of them sent me messages asking what had happened, telling me she was devastated, suggesting I was overreacting. I replied to one of them, the one I'd always thought was relatively reasonable. I explained my side calmly and included screenshots of the financial records and messages. She didn't reply, but the concerned messages from the friend group stopped. A week after she was supposed to return, I got a call from her mother. She told me her daughter had come by to collect her things and had been difficult about it. She'd blamed me for ruining everything, for being controlling, for not understanding that she deserved to enjoy her life. Her mother had apparently told her that I'd been more than understanding and that she needed to take responsibility for her choices. They'd argued. Her daughter had left with her bags and hadn't spoken to her since. Her mother apologized again, which I told her wasn't necessary. She asked how I was holding up, and I admitted I was doing better than expected. She said she wasn't surprised. She said I'd always struck her as someone with a strong sense of self-worth, and she was glad I hadn't let her daughter erode that. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into campaigns and strategy sessions. My performance actually improved, probably because I wasn't constantly distracted by relationship drama and financial anxiety. My boss noticed and mentioned it during a casual conversation. He said I seemed more focused lately, more confident in my recommendations. I didn't tell him why, but I appreciated the recognition. Update 1. 3 weeks after the breakup, something happened that made me realize I'd dodged something bigger than I'd understood. I was scrolling through social media, something I'd mostly avoided since the split, when I saw a post from one of her friends. It was a group photo from the trip, all of them dressed up at some beach club. The caption mentioned celebrating their friend's engagement. Engagement. I zoomed in on the photo. There she was, wearing what looked like an engagement ring, standing next to a guy I'd never seen before. Some finance type with slicked back hair and an expensive watch. The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis. Nobody mentioned me. It was like I'd never existed. I sat there processing this information. The timeline didn't make sense. We'd been together when she left for the trip. The ring was clearly visible in photos from early in the vacation, which meant either she'd gotten engaged during a trip I'd paid for, or she'd already been seeing this guy before she left. I felt a lot of things in that moment, but anger wasn't the primary one. Mostly I felt validated. My gut instinct had been right. The distance, the entitled behavior, the casual disregard for my feelings, it had all been building toward this. I'd just been too close to see the full picture. I showed the photos to my roommate, because yes, I'd gotten a roommate to help with rent. A friend from college who'd been looking for a place. He looked at the pictures and let out a low whistle. He said some people had no shame, and I was lucky to be out of that situation. I agreed. The interesting part came a few days later. One of her friends, someone I'd always gotten along with, reached out to me privately. She apologized for not contacting me sooner. She said she hadn't known the full story until after everything exploded. Apparently, my ex had been seeing the finance guy for about 2 months before the trip. The vacation was actually a celebration of their relationship, funded partly by his money and partly by mine. The engagement had happened on day 3 of the trip, which explained why she'd been so eager to extend it. The friend told me that several people in their group had felt uncomfortable with the situation but hadn't known how to address it. She said my ex had painted me as controlling and stingy, someone who held her back from living her best life. The friend had believed it at first, but seeing how things had unfolded made her realize the truth. She said she was sorry for not reaching out sooner and asked if I was doing okay. I told her I appreciated the honesty and that I was doing fine. Better than fine, actually. I'd started saving money again, had more time for my hobbies, and felt generally lighter. She said she was glad, and that I deserved better than what I'd gotten. Around this time, I also discovered something interesting about the finance guy. Through some mutual connections and casual internet research, I learned he came from money but didn't actually have much of his own. Trust fund kid who'd never held a real job. The expensive lifestyle was funded by family wealth, and there were rumors he'd burned through a significant portion of his inheritance on bad investments and expensive girlfriends. I realized my ex had simply traded one ATM for another, except this one came with a shinier exterior. Part of me felt bad for the guy, but mostly I felt grateful it wasn't my problem anymore. My life settled into a new rhythm. Work continued to go well. I got promoted to senior account manager, which came with a salary increase that I immediately started putting toward actual investments instead of someone else's vacation fund. My roommate turned out to be great to live with, someone who respected boundaries and paid his share on time. We'd have dinner together sometimes and talk about normal things like sports and work and weekend plans. I started dating again, casually at first. Nothing serious, just coffee or drinks with people I met through friends or apps. It felt strange at first, being back in that world, but also refreshing. I'd forgotten what it was like to have conversations with someone who asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. Update 2. 2 months after the breakup, I ran into her at a coffee shop. It was one of those awkward moments you can't avoid in a mid-sized city. We made eye contact, and for a second, I thought about turning around and leaving. But I'd gotten there first, had already ordered, so I just nodded and found a table. She approached after getting her drink. She asked if we could talk. I told her we could, but I only had a few minutes before I needed to get to work. She sat down across from me, and I could see she'd been crying recently. Her eyes were red, makeup slightly smudged. She started by saying she'd made mistakes. She said the engagement was over, that the finance guy had turned out to be not what she expected. She said she'd been confused and stupid, and she missed what we had. She asked if there was any chance we could try again. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her what specifically she missed. She talked about our stability, how comfortable things had been, how I'd always been there for her. She didn't mention love. She didn't mention missing me as a person, just the security and comfort. I told her I understood she was going through something difficult, and I hoped she figured it out. But I told her we weren't getting back together. What we had was gone, killed by her choices and my subsequent clarity. I told her I wished her well, genuinely, but that chapter was closed. She started crying harder, saying she'd made one mistake and I was throwing away 4 years. I reminded her it wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern of choices, a fundamental disrespect for me and our relationship. I told her that her definition of a mistake and mine were clearly different, and that difference was precisely why we couldn't work. I finished my coffee and left. She didn't follow me. I felt bad for her in a distant way, the way you might feel bad for anyone going through a hard time. But I didn't feel responsible for fixing it, and I didn't feel tempted to go back. Work kept me busy. I landed a major client, someone in the manufacturing space who needed a complete overhaul of their digital presence. The project was challenging and time-consuming, exactly what I needed. I built out campaigns, optimized for ROAS, and watched the numbers improve week over week. There was something deeply satisfying about work where effort directly correlated with results. My roommate started dating someone, which meant I had the apartment to myself more often. I didn't mind. I'd grown comfortable with solitude in a way I hadn't been before. I read more. I started going to the gym regularly. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the relationship. One of those friends asked me if I was bitter about everything that had happened. I thought about it and realized I wasn't. Bitter would require still being emotionally invested, still caring enough to hold on to anger. I'd moved past that into something more like indifference. She'd made her choices, I'd made mine, and we were both living with the consequences. The financial recovery took a few months, but I rebuilt my savings faster than expected. Turns out when you're not funding someone else's lifestyle, money accumulates pretty quickly. I started thinking about buying a place, something small but mine. I met with a financial advisor who helped me set up a proper investment strategy. Numbers on a spreadsheet started growing in ways that felt meaningful. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back in with her mother after the engagement fell apart. The finance guy had apparently been even worse with money than she was, and when his family cut him off for his spending habits, the whole house of cards collapsed. They'd been planning an expensive wedding funded by his family money, and when that evaporated, so did the relationship. Part of me wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience. Most of me didn't care enough to find out. Update 3. 6 months after everything ended, I was in a completely different place mentally and practically. I'd closed on a small condo, nothing fancy but mine. My career had taken off in ways I hadn't expected. The major client I'd landed had referred me to 3 other companies, and I was being courted by a larger agency for a director position. I'd also met someone, a woman who worked in a completely different field, healthcare administration. We met at a friend's birthday party, started talking about the complexities of managing budgets and people, and discovered we had a lot in common. She was independent, had her own career and goals, and treated our dates as actual partnerships rather than sponsorship opportunities. We'd been seeing each other for about 6 weeks when she asked about my previous relationship. I told her the story, keeping it factual and unemotional. She listened carefully and then said something that stuck with me. She said it sounded like I'd had to learn the hard way that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just dependence dressed up in romantic language. She was right. My ex had depended on me, maybe even liked me in her way, but she'd never respected me as an equal partner. And I'd confused providing for someone with building something together. Around this time, I got a message from her mother. She told me her daughter was doing better, had gotten a full-time job, and was working on herself. Her mother didn't ask me to reconsider the relationship, didn't suggest we reconnect. She just wanted me to know that her daughter was okay and was starting to understand the lessons she needed to learn. I appreciated the update. I told her mother I was glad to hear it and that I hoped her daughter found what she was looking for. I meant it. Holding on to resentment would only hurt me, and I'd worked too hard to rebuild my life to let old wounds fester. My promotion came through. Director of Digital Strategy at a mid-sized agency. The salary was substantial, the work was challenging, and I had a team to lead. I thought about how different my life looked compared to 6 months ago. Better job, better living situation, healthier relationship, actual savings and investments. None of it would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd kept sending money, kept accepting disrespect, kept sacrificing my own growth for someone who saw me as a resource rather than a partner. The text message demanding more money had been a gift, in a way. It had stripped away the illusions and forced me to see reality clearly. I ran into one of her friends, the one who'd sent me the apologetic message months ago. She asked how I was doing, and I gave her the quick update. New job, new place, seeing someone. She smiled and said she was happy for me. She mentioned that my ex had asked about me recently, wondering how I was doing. I told her friend that was nice, but didn't matter much to me anymore. Because it didn't. The whole situation had become a story I told sometimes, a learning experience that shaped me but no longer defined me. I'd packed her bags and dropped them off, and in doing so, I'd unpacked my own life and rebuilt it better. The woman I was dating asked me once if I ever regretted how I'd handled things. If I wished I'd tried to work it out, given more chances, communicated differently. I told her no. I'd done what I needed to do to respect myself, and that was worth more than any relationship built on a foundation of disregard. We were sitting in my new condo when she asked, surrounded by furniture I'd picked out and books I actually had time to read. She looked around and said it felt like a home that belonged to someone who knew who they were. I realized she was right. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living my life instead of funding someone else's. My phone buzzed with a work email. Another client wanted to schedule a strategy session. I smiled and made a note to follow up in the morning. The apartment was quiet, comfortable mine. Outside, the city lights stretched out across the skyline. I had work I loved, people I cared about, and a future I was building intentionally. The text message that had started everything was long deleted from my phone, but I remembered it sometimes. Not with anger or regret, but with a strange kind of gratitude. It had forced my hand, pushed me to make a decision I should have made months earlier. I never replied to that message demanding more money. I just packed her bags and moved forward. And that simple choice of silence and action had changed everything. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button.